From Durban to Saracens, 5 Premiership titles, 3 European Cups, 26 caps for England, and even pulling on the red jersey for the British and Irish Lions.
Probably the most pertinent, the one that really has had application after rugby, is the one of resilience. When I first joined Saracens in 2008, we were still in the Challenge Cup, which often referred to as the Fish and Chips Cup. It's actually having to go through those difficult moments that when you do get over the line and win something substantial, it really means that much more. Brendan Fenter, when he first took over, he came with this sort of analogy that we only want 17% of your time. So for Saracens, it became about memories. It became about the things that you will leave the game one day reflecting on and the memories that you create as a consequence. A stonecutter will bang a rock 9,999 times without seeing anything, not even a mere scratch or dent. But it's on that 10,000 strike that the stone completely splits into two. And it wasn't about the 10,000 strikes, it was about the 9,999 strikes that came before it. But I think it's all those heartaches you go through that allow you to keep plowing and keep working hard and have that inner true belief.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Lesson from the Game podcast. Today we are joined by a true warrior of the game, Barritt. From Durban to Saracens, 5 Premiership titles, 3 European Cups, 26 caps for England, and even pulling on the red jersey for the British and Irish Lions. Now he's taken those same lessons of resilience, leadership and culture from the locker room into the boardroom, building Tikitonga Coffee and leading in the fintech world and in venture capital. This episode is packed with insights for young players, coaches, and anyone chasing high performance in sport or business. So let's get stuck into it. Brad, brother, how are you doing?
Super. Thank you for the lovely, very nice introduction. You don't often have it compiled in a few minutes, but it's great to meet you, Ben, and to be on the podcast today. Go through it.
Awesome, man. It's good to touch base with you.
Yeah, good to you. What about you, mate? You well?
I'm crazy, man. All good. You know, just had a nice poke bowl, salmon, rice, some mango. It was brilliant. So, you know, trying to eat clean and trying to become lean eventually. Not sure when that's going to happen, but it's a process. Brad, brother, it's great to have you, and thanks for taking the time. I know you're a busy man. You've got lots going on, and we're really looking forward to having you on this podcast. And we like to start off our podcast episode with the same question. What is the one lesson from the game that you have learned that you can share with our young rugby players and aspiring coaches?
I think of all of them, probably the most pertinent, the one that really has had application after rugby, is the one of resilience. I always speak to parents, particularly I have 3 young boys myself, and going through life in rugby, you have your ups or downs, and it's particularly the guys who usually maybe struggle in the beginning that develop these coping mechanisms and resilience in really challenging environments. So I think when people look back on their careers, you also recognize what an impact those very difficult patches in your career have been and how you're able to fight out of them and apply them into the real world. Because again, when you're starting a new career, you're starting from scratch, you're having to find a way. You're Googling acronyms every other day to try cope with that imposter syndrome. But I think it's that resilience that you generate as a professional rugby player, doing something in the spotlight and finding a way to get out of it, that really becomes an important tool in later life.
Oh, that's brilliant, man. I could definitely relate with those acronyms. You know, last year I did a seminar in a company in Spain, and they started speaking about OKRs. I'm like, what the hell is that? And like, objectives and key results. Gee, okay.
Yeah,
learn that lesson. So yeah, still learning.
You make it even harder when you're going multi-language too. So at least I'm keeping it simple in English, but you crossing all sorts of language barriers too, which I imagine is a challenge.
Oh man.
Today's Lessons from the Game episode was possible thanks to the support of Harris Begley Financial Planning. headed up by former Blackheath player Matt Begley. They are the experts to speak to for tailored advice on investments, mortgages, insurance, and pensions, helping you plan for a future of financial security. So when you think money, think Harris Begley and head to www.harrisbegley.co.uk. Approver Quilter Financial Services Limited and Quilter Mortgage Planning Limited, March 2025.
Brad, you've achieved some great things. So firstly and foremostly, congratulations on your career. And we're really excited to be deep diving into some of those highlights in your journey. But man, and you correct me if I'm wrong, 5 premierships, 3 European Cups. What the hell? What were you guys taking? Did you guys maybe, I don't know, get some South African, all the biltong that's available there in the UK that you guys have access to, or the guys taking South African produce? I mean, what was that like, that era of Saracens winning all those trophies and those titles?
Yeah, well, I think that it's the perspective of where it came from. I think people sort of focus on the end goal, but it was really the starting point of the Saracens journey that made the journey that much more so much more satisfaction, particularly in the European Champions Cup. As a squad, we really had to sort of build our pedigree in that competition. We knew the former clubs that you'd been at, likes of Toulouse, had always really had that long established pedigree and understanding of how to win it. Where when I first joined Saracens in 2008, we were still in the Challenge Cup, which often referred to as the Fish and Chips Cup. It's the one that every team grudgingly wants to do well in, but ultimately the goal there is to get into the big time, which is the Champions Cup. So, we earned our way out of that with a good Premiership season. Our first year, we got out the pool. I think we lost in the quarterfinals. And then it was another series of 3 to 4 years. I lost semi-final. We lost to Toulon in the final in 2013. And to get over the line 2016 just felt that much more special to the team, because it was really a sense of the journey that had come before that got us over the line. And it wasn't sort of a flash in the pan. So it was a team that had been together over a period of years, had built that rapport, had built that culture, but really were determined to get the big prize. And for us, that was the Champions Cup. The Premiership, similarly, we had to go through a bit of heartache. So the season before our first Premiership title, we lost in the 83rd minute to Leicester. And I'll briefly pause there because I actually was in Durban over the weekend at Kings Park. And I think of setbacks in life and moments in time. And every other Sharks player always talks about 2007. And I know you on the other hand of it. So, I think when I spoke about resilience, it's actually having to go through those difficult moments that when you do get over the line and win something substantial, it really means that much more. There was a time in my life where I thought I was cursed. I think I went off the back of the Super Rugby in 2007, then lost in the final of the Under-21 World Cup. And I think a season later, we lost the Premiership final. So I was thinking to myself, that's 3 from 3. Where do you go now? And then, it's that turning of the tide. And then we went off the back. I think the Saracens were 3 out of 3 in a Champions Cup. And the next 5 Premiership finals, we won them all. So again, I spoke about resilience at the head of the program, but I think it is those periods of time that you go through that make you getting over the line that much more enjoyable.
Yeah, man, I felt for you guys years later in that 2007 final, but I'll be honest with you, that was emotionally draining, and but you guys did well that season. Unbelievable. The Sharks, for them, everybody's listening in the Sharks for a very long time. They were a very dominant team, and you talk about regrets. As a Bulls player watching that, I'm so grateful that Franz Rostein didn't kick it out. He should have just kicked it out. It's that simple. But, you summarized it very briefly, what you achieved at Saracens, what you guys achieved and how you guys created. And, Ben and myself, we would be obsessed with mindset and how teams built that strong culture. And similar to what you guys had, the Sharks, we had the Bulls. We all know we are part of a generation. You were young when you started out, but it was a generation that switched, where something changed. And that doesn't happen by chance. And so I guess the question I'm asking, so what was the big thing that you guys put into place? What were the big bedrocks at Saracens which help you? Because the result of, you just mentioned earlier, a lot of people are result focused or outcome focused, but it's that process. What was the massive mind shift change at Saracens which allowed you guys to actually build that belief and build that culture where you guys started dominating for so many years?
Yeah, there were some very sort of subtle psychology things that were overcome. I think in the early years, when I compare when I first arrived to probably at our peak in sort of 2015, 2016, was, the squads weren't that much better or worse. The players that Saracens had recruited always been fundamentally a fantastic squad. But I think Saracens had perennially underachieved, and it had a lot to do with the psychology and maybe the application to the club. When I first arrived, I just got the sense that a lot of people were doing what they needed to do, but at no point was that cascading into players inspiring each other and bringing out the best in each other. So not that it was clocking in and clocking out, but you didn't feel that there was this cohesive team where guys were every day excited to come to the club. I think at our best, there was this real buzz amongst the change room, and guys were coming in excited to go to work, but also inspiring each other. And that wasn't necessarily just about having fun. There was the sort of unique buy-in where players every other day were inspiring guys to go that little bit further, to see how much further you could dig, how much more was under the surface for the team to sort of extract out of itself. And that becomes pretty infectious, because I think young players see that and go, geez, this guy's an international. He's here a lot earlier before me and's leaving a lot later after me. But more importantly, during that day, he looks to be enjoying himself. He's not a misery to be around. He's actually really immersing himself in the entire facets of every part of the day at Saracens. And that's the kind of culture that was created, that guys came to work excited, but excited to actually push the dial forward and sort of push the team to a new dimension. So at no point during those successful years did the team ever feel like the job was done or we were the finished article. It was that constant striving for being better and seeing what more we could do and more, strings to our bow we could have. The other big fundamental shift came, I think, Brendan Fenter, when he first took over, he came with this sort of analogy that we only want 17% of your time. And we're sort of trying hard to sort of work what that meant. He said, the reality of professional sport, there's a lot of recovery. You're going to be at the training center, for 4 or 5 hours a day. We're going to give you 3 days off a week. But when you're here, you're going to apply everything you can and give me 100%. In turn, we'll trust you, treat you like adults. We want you to pursue opportunities outside of sport, whether it be in tertiary education, business, family life. We want you to really immerse yourself in London. And I think what you got was players that then started to sort of identify the club that I'm no longer just a rugby player. I'm actually Brad. I'm a person. I'm a father. I'm a person who's excited about the future after rugby. And you had this sort of deep belief that the club really cared about you as an individual. And in turn, by being respected and treated really well, you felt in turn that you wanted to give back. And it's that like codependence that the club and the players started to develop amongst ourselves, that we believed that in the times where things got really tough and people had to stand up and be counted, that we had the ability to dig a little bit deeper because it meant that much more different to us.
Man, that's brilliant. And I think I like what you said, that you guys were seen as more than just rugby players, you being a dad. And I know that a lot of players had shared, what Saracens have done for them. But before we dive into that, and I know Ben's got quite a few follow-up questions, what interests me is, did you guys set out a clear, was it just due to the player investment or the environment that was created, or was there a clear vision where you guys actually sat down, this is what we want to achieve, this is our target, and this is not to rub it in, but in 2006 pre-season, before we won the Super Rugby, our vision was clear. We wanted to become the best club team in the world with the Bulls, with Heineke Meyer, and everybody bought in, and we knew exactly we needed to be the fittest team, the most aggressive team. We needed to have a strong defense. Was there anything like that where the picture was kind of painted for you guys as a team, or was it something which just happened naturally because of the environment that was created?
For us, there was never any goals or targets. I think the outcome was not necessarily what we wanted. We wanted to enjoy the journey and make sure that every day we were squeezing as much out of every opportunity that we got. So for Saracens, it became about memories. It became about the things that you will leave the game one day reflecting on, and the memories that you create as a consequence. I think that in turn sometimes took the pressure off saying we either failed or we succeeded, because it wasn't about the outcome. It was about the process of getting there. And the process wasn't always just about having fun. It was almost a sense of, can you look yourself in the mirror every day and say, I did everything I can to make myself a better player? And in turn, did I have that impact on the team that I always wished to have?
As G was saying, we sort of have these amazing conversations with people and we hear different dynamics. And you were obviously part of that era at Saracens, and you turned a corner. What, in your experience, is that replicable in business? Like, what's like, and where I'm going with that is it something that's become top down? Like you talked about Brendan Venter coming in, or is it that you had, is it the genius recruitment that you get certain people who all buy into that, and they're a certain type of person who's going to work hard for each other? Is it, what does it look like, and can it be replicated?
I think so. There are, I guess, unique traits that can be replicated. I think what I have learned outside of sport is that you don't get that same honesty and transparency in the workplace than you do in sport. I guess because rugby is very black and white. It's very easy to distinguish whether someone is completely committed, and you can see it right in front of your face, where in my experience in the business world is a bit more multifaceted. You also don't have that sense of success or failure every week. So I think when people ask me, well, what do you miss most about sport? And I think that the ability to have a goal every Monday, to have a result and a conclusion, and start the project all again on a Monday is pretty fascinating and unique. And you get that gratification of the plan coming together and everyone buying into a project and bring it to fruition, where in the business world, those sales cycles and those points of success and failure are a lot more long-winded. I often ask myself on a Friday, am I closer to my goal than I was on Monday? And more than often, I actually don't know the answer, because it's gone off on a complete different tangent and it's gone sideways, neither forward nor back, just kind of down a different path. So I think from that degree, it's quite nice to be in sport, because very often is what you see is what you get. You do get a few scam artists along the way, the people with a big mouth, but in sport, they get found out very easily. In the business world, it may be taken a little bit longer, but I sort of live by the notion of only be prepared to ask something of someone if you're prepared to do it yourself. And for me, the best leaders kind of exemplify that. They're people who lead by example. They're people who, don't ask the team to do something that they don't think they would be able to do themselves. And in turn, you create that environment where, there's that shared responsibility, and you allow those young leaders to step up. I guess people look back on your career and they kind of ask, what are the best traits of a leader? And for me, I think it's a leader being the most genuine version of himself. It's not trying to be someone that you're not, and it's leading in a a genuine way that people are going to follow you and they believe you. You know, the moment you get a leader trying to step outside of what's comfortable for him, I think people start to see through the cracks.
And I guess that's awesome, Brad. And I guess my follow-up question was, I've been trying to work out, looking in from the outside at Saracens, G and I spoke about it a bit, but there was yourself, there's Owen Farrell, Maro Itoje, there was Steve Borthwick before you guys. Obviously, there was John Smith, and I was trying to work out, do those guys, were they naturally amazing leaders, or was it a genius recruitment and recruiting on character and then developing the skill set, or is it actually, are they products of the environment whereby, you know, this behavior has been modeled before them? So someone like Jamie George or Owen Farrell saw it from you guys, and then they carry the baton, if you like, and it sort of becomes something that is just nurtured and grown within.
I believe it's probably a hybrid of that. Having now had 3 boys myself, you start to see senses of nature versus nurture. So I think there's a distinctive character trait that's in every single person, and of those 5 characters you've mentioned, all are fundamentally very different in terms of how they perceive life, how they probably impact a team from a leadership perspective. But I think the reason why all have been successful is because it comes back to the nurturing of an environment. You know, I was fortunate to have played under John and Steve. And for me, I thought both were fantastic leaders, but were completely different in the way they approached life, they approached playing rugby, and probably in the way that they sort of resonated with the team. And it showed me that neither is right or wrong. The fact that they were successful is because people believed the way in which they led was genuine to that person in itself. So I sort of took that into sort of my latter captaincy, is that the way people are going to follow you is that they believe what you're saying, and they believe that you are leading through instinct, but also something in a genuine way that makes you Brad. And I think the other guys, you know, the Jamies, the Owens, the Maros, learned under the same sort of pretense that people respect that what you're doing is trying to put the team in a better place, and your unique message is seen as genuine in the face of adversity or in the face of trying to push the team to the next challenge.
Ben and myself, we've been speaking about it, about shared leadership. We spoke back in the day about John Smith and Victor and Fourie, all those guys, you know, having those strong characters in the team. So my question would be, and maybe some of them were younger at the stage when you were captain, but how did you manage that back then? Because you had some strong characters in that team. And what was your leadership style like? Because you do get player captains, like, I'm in charge, I'm the captain, you know, you got to listen what I say, and we all know that doesn't always work. Where you were captain by John, I was captain by John, you know, firstly his humility, and I felt he had this empathy about him. He really made the effort to understand where everybody comes from, and he tried to help or basically use everybody as a resource for the greater good. So how did you manage that with all those strong characters and potentially egos? Maybe they weren't. With all those great players at Saracens back in the day.
So I think, yeah, back to my earlier point about this sort of genuine excitement where people used to come to work and to training, is that every other day you're inspired by the actions of someone else. So I think, you know, the unique perspective of Saracens at that time, there was a core of, you know, 5 to 6 senior players who at any given point, I trusted them to step up, and when they felt the timing was right and it felt organic to do so. And in turn, I think they knew they had my trust to really lead by example, or, you know, take the floor whenever they wanted. So for me, I think it was that shared ownership in leadership. I think with the talent and with the unique rugby IQ we had at our disposal, it would be stupid to think you could be the beacon of light in every facet of the game. I guess rugby is so multidisciplinary that, you know, people have to step up in whatever component section of the game there is, whether it be the scrum, the line-out, the ruck, the attack, the defense. And ultimately, there's leadership going on all over the park at any given time. So it made sense of leaning on those skills and allowing those people to push the team forward, having an open door policy to bring in new ideas. And in turn, you had players who felt they had the respect of, let's call it the senior players in the team, and they were able to push the team to bigger and better heights. So yeah, I think one of the strengths we always had at Saracens is that we had a trusted leadership group. I had been part of that for 4 or 5 years before I came captain. So I'd learned the ropes of how the wider team and how the wider leadership group can push the team forward and be part of something bigger.
Thanks for sharing that, Brad. And it's great to see that. A lot of people don't always get what happens behind the scenes in a team. They see all these great players, but it takes a lot of alignment. It takes a lot of humility as well sometimes to really focus on what can you do to impact the team. And it's great to hear how you guys worked as a team. You guys were known at the stage. You guys created this identity. And I remember that people called it the Wolfpack. If you can give us the backstory behind that, what was that all about? Was it something that you guys created on defense? You guys were always hunting together. If you can maybe elaborate a bit more on the Wolfpack and what that was all about.
Yeah, I think in the early days, there was a focus on what are the unique building blocks to a successful team. And you would know, go through having been involved in a lot of successful teams, that any team that has a porous defense will never be a championship winning team. So Saracens sort of tried to build up our pedigree by laying those foundations really early. I think in the latter years from sort of 2015 to 2019, we really brought in a lot more ruthlessness in our attacking edge. But in, let's call it 2008 to 2012, the success was built on an incredible defensive effort and a really high pressure kicking game. So the Wolfpack became synonymous with people buying into a playing style. I think at many points in time, it was frowned upon in England. They wanted to see a more expansive game played. But I think the way the game had been refereed and governed over that period of time, it very much favored a defensive outlook. The ruck was hotly contested. It was very hard to continue to play multi-phase rugby. So having this, fearsome defense with line speed, with an emphasis on big collisions and being able to put pressure at the breakdown became synonymous with what Saracens was all about. Particularly in those winter months, November through to March in the UK, where they're an absolute slugfest. You weren't going to play any pretty rugby. So being that team that had that steely reserve and being able to sort of defend for countless sort of phases became part of what excited the team, and it was quite infectious in terms of players wanting to do more for the team.
Brad, I'd love to know, so quite often you see it with teams that are ultimately successful. They fall at the last hurdle a couple of times prior to that. And having spoken to cognitive and psychologists, I sort of understand about the psychology of it, and that's been fascinating. And often, the thing that comes to mind is, and it's iconic, you guys playing against Toulon, and Johnny Wilkinson and Owen Farrell was sort of, he hits his drop goal and they're lying on the floor and there's this tap and everybody made this big deal. It was almost like the passing of the baton. And you guys went close a couple of times. Did you guys, you mentioned earlier that, you'd lost a couple of, you'd lost the final against the Bulls in 2007, etc. Did you feel like your turn was coming, or as a group, and it was just a matter of time? And were you guys confident, as it appears from the outside, or did you have those self-doubts as a team, or were you just going, oh no, next time it's our turn?
Yeah, I think when you are to reminisce and look back on it, it all felt like part of the journey. But obviously, at periods of time during that journey, there was always moments for reflection on wondering if our turn would ever come. But one of the big sort of unique concepts that Saracens bought into, it was this notion of the stonecutter. It's a famous quote. I don't know the author quite at this point in time, but it sort of followed the thread of, a stonecutter will bang a rock 9,999 times without seeing anything, not even a mere scratch or dent. But it's on that 10,000 strike that the stone completely splits into two. And it wasn't about the 10th, the 10,000 strikes. It was about the 9,999 strikes that came before it. So a lot of the work and a lot of the effort often in sport goes unseen. And you have to appreciate that all the hard work and the journey that gets you to that goal, that when you eventually get over the line, it wasn't about that day. It was about everything that came before it. And that is the highs, the lows, the good days, the bad days, the moments of anguish and the moments of triumph. So upon success and upon failure, we always went back to that quote that if we were arriving at training and we felt like we were pushing the team forward, we were never standing still, but trying to raise those standards year in and year out, that the journey would eventually reach a climax and then be able to stay there. So often in life, I think climbing the mountain is often the easy task. I think staying at the top of the mountain for a considerable period of time is often harder. So the stonecutter analogy for us became that beacon for in times of failure and success, in that whatever you're doing along the journey, it's important to sort of focus on squeezing as much you can do out of every day.
That's fascinating. How did you guys sustain that at the Bulls? Is it a similar sort of thing that with Heineken Meer? Did you guys have the similar mindset?
Yeah, and I think we also experienced something similar. Obviously, I got to the Bulls in 2005, but I ended up playing Vodacom Cup. I wasn't good enough for the Super Rugby, played one game. I was coming back off an injury. But I remember those years before, the 2003, 2004, 5 and 6. Those were tough years, didn't win it. And it aligns completely just what he said about the stonecutter. It's like everybody was just chipping away, getting better each year. Guys were getting fitter, guys were getting stronger. We all know the whole the way the Bulls were seen in the past. These big dumb forwards, they don't know what's going on. They just want to break the wall, and they say yes sir, yes sir. We actually were an intelligent bunch, and we knew what we were doing. And it comes down to all those compound interest. Brad, I would like to transition a little bit here. Obviously, you achieved great things as a rugby player. And I know the Saracens environment helped you guys also with the transition with life after rugby. Speaking to a lot of former Saracens players, a lot of guys have gone to work in companies, launched their own businesses. If you can maybe tell us, how did you prepare for life after rugby? And because I read up, you tell me if I'm mistaken, you started the Tikitonga Coffee in 2016, I think, if I'm not mistaken. How was that idea born? Why going to the coffee business, and how did you prepare for that journey and for that life after rugby?
Yeah, I think I was quite fortunate that predating me leaving school, I had I don't want to say it's strict, but sort of encouraging parents to sort of pursue life outside of rugby simultaneously. So upon leaving school, I initially started with a business science, which was kind of against the grain of every other contracted player at the Sharks, and probably across most unions, is that most unions wanted to have full control. They wanted you to be at the training center. They allowed you to do some sort of diploma. But I think part of the condition for me joining the Sharks was that I want to do a proper degree and be able to sort of pursue life after rugby one day, or if that comes quicker, you're at least set up for the future. So I completed an undergraduate in South Africa, and I think part of my decision to go to the UK was not only experience-based, but I wanted to do a postgraduate and master's in the UK at the same time. So Saracens had a strong affiliation with the University of Hertfordshire, who were fantastic to allow me to do an MSc at the time. I think a course that usually takes 2 years took me about 4.5 years. I just did it slightly slower. back to the stonecutter, was just sort of chipping away at it. And then to eventually sort of get over that hurdle and get it done was a little bit of a weight off my shoulder. And despite all those things you learn not necessarily being relevant to whatever you do, I think it just is an indication to people, to people outside of rugby, that you're willing to learn and adapt and focus your mind to something slightly different. It was really after that when I was considering doing sort of work experience, what to do once the sort of tertiary education had finished, that good friends of mine, Chris Wiles and Alistair Hargreaves, had started their own business, which was Wolfpack Lager. And I wasn't much of a beer drinker myself, and I always found it quite funny that people always spoke about rugby, as this really strong drinking culture, and the only times they ever socialized was in the pub or in a nightclub. But in my experience, rugby players have probably spent more times in cafes and coffee shops than anything else. And in tandem, I was, also frustrated of always seeing coffee pitched as a really hipster commodity. In London, it was the long wispy mustache and beard and quite alternative. So the idea was to create a brand that was synonymous with sport. I always felt that coffee and sport were sort of powerful tools in bringing people together. So it was taking all the learnings and successes of how sport is a unifier of people and applying that to coffee. I then kind of had gone on a journey of, what do you call it? Brad's Beans didn't sound appropriate. And Tikitonga had become that song adopted by Saracens. It was obviously started out in New Zealand. I think it had been sung across, schools and clubs in New Zealand for a long period of time. And one of our academy players had spent a season, I think, just outside of Christchurch. And in 2008, we had won our first game of the season. And it was Brendan Fent who asked the team, we're going to do our victory song here. And everyone looked around. It's like, we don't have a victory song. And he said, well, how don't you have a victory song? And this fella with Tom Ryder stood up and said, hey, I learned this amazing song. And he did it. He nailed it. And the rest is history. I think we're now 17 years later, and it's still part of exactly what Saracens do week in and week out. And people get excited to sing together. So Tikitonga for me was a feeling of joy, of happiness, a feeling of a team coming together in song. And it seemed like an appropriate name for a coffee roastery. So I remember in the early days, people were like, what's it called? I keep having to double check. But the great thing with a unique name is that it's very memorable. And it's been an exciting journey. And having been part of seeing it go from infancy to what it is today, sort of 8.5 years later, it's been sort of very, very satisfying.
Brad, what interests me, and that's brilliant. You prepared for life after rugby, you had a proper education. But when you got this idea, you want to go in a coffee business, how did you go about it? In terms of, did you know someone that guided you, knew about coffee? Like, where did you, because I imagine back then you couldn't go on ChatGPT because it didn't exist. And, Google, and the reason I ask this is because a lot of rugby players out there, they have this idea to start the business and something that they're passionate about. And they tend to make a lot of mistakes. We all do. I did back in the day. But, that process, before turning, it was an idea and transforming it into a brand, and it was a real concrete business. What did that look like?
Yeah, I think there were countless hours, and of like everyone, you make mistakes along the way. I was quite fortunate. I initially partnered with a man who'd been in the business sort of 20 years predating our launch of Tikitonga. So I had a good relationship with specific cooperative farms across the world. From a sourcing perspective, also had sort of key relationships with machinery manufacturers, which allowed us to go into our sort of different verticals. So we wanted to focus on D2C. We never wanted to be a coffee shop per se, but we wanted to be a brand behind, high quality specialty coffee. So we started with a B2B network. So it was anything from cafes, restaurants, even pubs and bars who had a coffee offering, but then sort of soon lent into sort of the workplace and office coffee, which allowed us to sort of go into machinery and supply machinery and service and maintenance with wholesale coffee coming in, supplying the groups. Off the back of that, the brand started to get some momentum. We had some great partnerships. Tottenham Hotspur, Saracens, we had Lords, we had Turf Games, Tough Mudder, British Rowing, England Hockey. So very sort of strong sports health and exercise focus. So we launched a few sort of mobile coffee trucks and mobile coffee vans that attended all these functions and all these events and got the name out there. We talk about liquid on lips. There's no better way to get your product sampled than in people's earshots is for them to taste it. So off the back of that, we started to generate our own following and start to sort of approach customers to go, direct to business. And then with the event of fantastic platforms like Shopify, you then can reach a huge audience from a central hub. So, the direct-to-consumer business started to grow. In 2019, we partnered with Diageo. So we are the official roaster and exclusive roaster of Guinness 232 coffee, which every day we have to answer people, no, there's no additives, there's no alcohol. It's a blend of coffee that is roasted at a very high temperature, 232 degrees for a brief moment, which gives off a similar flavor profile to that of Guinness, a sweet malty flavor profile that has been incredibly successful. That's sold across the US, parts of Europe, UK, and South Africa. And in 2018, we went into the retail space in South Africa, where we've got a couple cafes in KZN.
Wow. How was the transition then out of playing to for you? People say that we talk about it often, and they say they struggle, et cetera. But I'd imagine with all of that experience that you undertook whilst playing, that it set you up for a smooth transition.
Yeah, I think everyone has their own unique journey. I guess I've been quite lucky that I've always had key focus bits and bits of, let's call it a family outside of sport. I think what people really miss when they leave rugby is that sense of community, that, let's call it that family environment, that everyone's in it together. I think when you're in sport, it's very hard to keep friends outside of sport because none of your friends are off on a Monday and a Thursday. They spend time on the weekends, where rugby, your most important days are on the weekend. So you don't tend to sort of congregate together. So then when players leave rugby, you leave behind a huge family and sense of community. So I was lucky. I know we mentioned Alistair. I joined Pollinate for the first 3 years. So in tandem with Tikitonga, I had really strong focus points and had the ability to sort of immerse myself in a new culture and a new environment and always feel like you're progressing. So I think if you're a player, don't be scared of change. I think don't be scared of really knuckling down and learning something new, because I think when you are able to learn something new and apply your mind in a different way that you never envisaged doing before, you really have that sense of confidence, and it gives you a real success factor that you've done something outside of sport, where I think for a lot of players, they are very, very capable, but it's almost the fear of the unknown, I think, that scares players probably from pursuing commercial interests outside of sport. So sometimes I think just throwing yourself in the deep end allows you to try find a way, and leaning on those features of resilience and hard work and honesty that come with rugby players that allow you to eventually get to where you want to go.
Yeah, it's super interesting. And just prior to that, Brad, I'd love to know, what was, when you were playing, what was the toughest period for you, or toughest moments, and how did you overcome them?
I think there were a few. There was shared moments of disappointment. I think I mentioned 2007 with the Sharks. That was probably my first real heartache as a player. I generally probably woke up, I wouldn't say in a cold sweat, but almost that feeling at the middle of night that was almost unbelievable of what happened. I'd probably not been in a game of that magnitude. It had been like a stellar season at the Sharks. We'd had a home semi-final and a home final. I think we led for 82 minutes of the game. And it just was almost that shock that, you were always wondering what could it be. I'd say nothing felt like that, even though I lost in finals. We had a similar experience with Saracens in 2013. The week before we lost to Toulon in the European Champions final, we had to play the Premiership final the week after, and we lost in the 120 minutes to Northampton. I don't know if you remember. So it was back-to-back setbacks. But then I think it's also the personal journeys that you've been on that also are really hard to manage. I actually was first selected in the England squad in 2010. I went on the summer tour with them to Australia. I was then picked in the squad in 2011 to play in the Autumn Internationals. I was led to believe I would definitely be selected in one of those tests. And on the first week after the selection, I broke my finger. Really bad, sort of spiral fracture, required surgery. I then missed sort of 5 to 6 weeks. Had to fight my way back in. Luckily, the season at Saracens had gone really well. We won the Premiership, but at the culmination of that Premiership, there was, a hopeful sort of World Cup squad opportunity, but I had to have a groin surgery. I had a hernia. So, you start to think you've been in the squad since 2010, but the two key opportunities that you've had, injuries have let you down. But again, you eventually keep that sense of resilience. And, luckily I'd had it from a team dynamic, and I think every player has had setbacks in their life when they haven't been picked or they've been injured. But I think it's all those heartaches you go through that allow you to keep plowing and keep working hard and have that inner true belief in yourself that you can get to where you want to go.
It's does that come from, do you think that resilience, do you think that was something, because you could have gone one way or the other, couldn't you? You could have just crumbled, I suppose, or you could. Does that go back to your childhood, growing up, running around Kersney? Like, where does it, your parents, is that a source of some of it?
I probably really it's called it as a schoolboy player, came into my own probably quite later on. I was a handy player, but there's kind of a light bulb moment where things change. So a lot of players maybe go through their school career being the man, and they're used to running through teams, and they've never really dealt with a lot of those hard, difficult parts of the journey that players have to adapt. And I think part of the journey of, being someone who's eager to be noticed and working hard and doing everything that you can, you create that resilience that, you have to show that your determination is a factor and your character. So I think a lot of those early foundation blocks of character and resilience are generated in your earlier life. It probably also was beneficial that I had an older brother who was as competitive as me and never let me win anything. So I remember many days of bowling in the backyard, whether it be in cricket or trying to tackle them in rugby, where there was no extra meter given, and I would bowl for hours to then be bowled out in one ball, and he'd walk back inside and say the game's done. So I try to tell my 5-year-old that when his 10-year-old brother's giving him a hard time, don't worry, that he's creating resilience for you.
Brad, it's great to hear, and we all have these experiences from high school. I think the schoolboy rugby in South Africa is quite competitive, and I think we were fortunate really back then, even though all our games weren't televised back then, it played a massive role, and we deal with a lot of pressure. But the question I would like to ask, because I know we are running out of time and you need to jet off to your next meeting, but the question I want to ask you, we had Victor Matfield on here, and he told the story of John Smith, which he tells very well, from Matt Stevens, what happened in the test matches in the build-up to the World Cup in 2007. And, Bucky's, he really struggled with, I remember that week in the build-up, he struggled that Matt Stevens, a South African, was playing for England. But what I would like to ask you is that, what did it mean for you to play, to wear that jumper? Being a South African, getting that opportunity to represent England, because I think it can be different for each player. For some players, it might be a case, okay, I didn't get opportunity in South Africa, but I get this opportunity to play it internationally. But then the only people that can really answer that question is that one actually in that position. So my question is, what did it mean to you playing for England, being a South African?
My journey was very different, and I guess that emotional tie was much less of a factor for me in that, all four of my grandparents are English. My parents are actually, my mom was British born, my dad was born in Zimbabwe, or what used to be called Rhodesia. So my older brother was born in Zimbabwe. So both grandfather and dad played for Rhodesia and Zimbabwe back in the day. I just happened to be born in South Africa. So I grew up in a country where, the Springboks were, obviously what they were. They were an iconic team. I represented South African schools, South Africa under 21. But at the back of my head, I also probably went as many times to Twickenham as a kid as I had been to Springbok tests. So my grandfather played for England in 20s, played for effectively the Welsh B side. I think that was during the war when people had to get out of London. But there'd always been a really strong English heritage within my family. I always speak to friends, and I vividly remember having Yorkshire puddings in South Africa, and my friends used to think, what on earth is going on at the Barritt household? So the family really, followed a really strong English heritage. I was proud to be South African, but I was also proud that I had this tie back to Britain and back to my grandparents. And when I was eventually selected for England, I obviously felt incredibly proud because it was almost a coming back to where my grandfather had started the journey. He was initially brought out to Zimbabwe by the British government to help with the agricultural sector. So it was like life had gone a little bit full circle. And I also believe that everyone's journey is a little bit different. I left South Africa as a really young man. I was 20 years old. I initially set off on a journey that, what a great opportunity. I'm 20 years old. I've got an undergraduate degree. I'm going to live in London. I'm going to play for a great club in Saracens, but I also get the opportunity to see the world and do something slightly different. So at that point in time, England and international rugby was not the main focus. I'd initially signed for 2 years and thought, I'm going to come back potentially to the Sharks at 22 and we'll see what happens. But my journey went off in a different way, and I'm very proud in looking back on it that I represented England. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate and have the utmost respect for the Springboks, but my personal journey just turned out a little bit different.
Oh, awesome. Good enough. And thanks for sharing that backstory. I think it really gives our audience way much more insight because, we tend to just look at things and how can I say what we are seeing. And I think it's brilliant that you had that opportunity to represent England, seeing that your heritage is actually English. And that's unbelievable. Thanks for sharing that, Ben.
What's a challenge now is the divided household of the Barritt, because my eldest lived in South Africa till he was 6. So he is English through and through. Box Friday at school is a very challenging day for him because he wants to wear his England top and they don't allow him. However, my middle son, he was 5 months when he moved back. So he only knows the Springboks being successful and sort of being indoctrinated at school. So he gets very excited to see the Springboks play. So it's a bit of a luxury which way my third son will go. Does he side with the older brother or does he side with the middle brother?
Oh man, that's going to be interesting. I think we have to do a follow-up pod to you what happens there in a few years' time. But Brad, it's been unbelievable. I know Ben has just 1 or 2 questions you want to sign off. I know you need to run.
Cheers,
Ben,
G.
over to you.
Brad, just before we sign off, you at the outset we asked you about your one lesson from the game. You mentioned resilience, and it's funny because when I think of the way you played, and I think most rugby players are carrying an injury most of the times they play, aren't they? But I think of you being injured, the breaking your hand. I recall you had a problem with your eye as well, and it was pretty touch and go. Overcoming those injuries, what can you just give, we've got a lot of players, coaches listening. Can you just give an indication to the mindset of, I don't know, playing with those injuries, but your mindset of how to overcome them and just any advice?
It's a funny one because, people always kind of ask me, like, what sort of place did you need to get yourself in? And to me, it just felt like the right thing and a very normal thing to expect to do. I think it also probably spoke to the emotional connection that I had to those teams at that point in time, that, you didn't want to miss anything for the world. To me, it didn't seem like a sacrifice because I cared so much and, I valued being part of that team, and all I wanted was for that team to be successful. So when I look back on it, it obviously seems a little bit different because you aren't at that point in time and you aren't as emotionally invested in it. But at that point in time, I wouldn't have ever thought of doing anything else. If it were possible, I was willing to do it. And that's just kind of the way I was wired and the way I wanted to be part of that team.
I don't expect that answer, to be fair. I've got a couple of short-ish questions. I know it's a difficult one putting you on the spot, but your favorite centre partner or a centre partner that you would have liked to have played with, if that's too difficult to answer.
I love playing with Manu. Obviously for England, I guess which was unfortunate is that, we never got a great run together because of injuries. We had a patch between sort of 2012 and 2013 where we maybe had 6-7 games together. We had a great day against the All Blacks, but the latter years beyond that, either one of us was kind of injured for a considerable period of time. So we never got to share the field as much together. From a Saracens perspective, there are obviously some amazing players that I played with. The likes of Kameli Ratabu, when I first started, was an incredible player. Strength, speed. You had a Marcelo Bosch who was just silky. I think everything that dude, he made the game look pretty effortless. He was a great person, a dear friend. And we also had a guy called Duncan Taylor, who again was a phenomenal player, and the things he could do both with and without the ball. And when he were fit, he was someone that you would welcome back into the team at any point in time. So those are the four,
nice.
The top of my head that I really enjoyed playing with.
And I guess the final one, what was it like playing and winning a Lions series in Australia?
Well, for me, it was more of a celebration because whilst I didn't play in the Test series, it felt like an extended holiday when we had 10 days at the end without any games. But I think just being part of the wider squad, obviously, we were there during the prep weeks, through the midweek games. And you just got a sense that the team were well placed to do something special. It was also a time where Australia had some really clinical backs, and it's awesome to see Australia coming back to the team that they once were and once were feared. I know, Gerthro, during your time, you never had an easy game against Australia, and neither did I. So
Bloemtest still haunts me.
It was especially pleasing to do it in their own backyard. So,
cheers, Brad.
No, Brad, thanks. My apologies. I know you need to get going. Just want to say thank you for taking the time for joining us. It was unbelievable. Wish we had a bit more time. And it was really great to hear your side of things, how you experienced it. And you definitely shared a lot of insights during this podcast. And before we say goodbye to Brad, we'd just like to ask everybody to help us to grow the show. Continue to like, follow, and subscribe. And please comment if there's anything that you would like us to talk about. Any feedback will be welcome. And Ben and I, we also created a new community on School. So hit us up with a DM on Instagram and we will send you those links.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Right, everybody, thank you for joining us on this amazing episode on Lessons from the Game. Looking forward to hearing more from you guys.